Welcome to Suburban Warrior, the podcast that will impact, inspire, and empower you to transform your mindset and become the badass warrior that you are. I'm your host and fellow warrior, Chrissy Pfeiffer, former clinician and corporate marketing exec turned multi-passionate entrepreneur, performance and life coach, and mom to 4 not-so-little warriors. Each week, I will bring you honest conversations with inspiring guests to share their stories of resilience, optimism, success, and simple yet effective strategies so that you transform your thoughts and change your behavior to get the results you want in your life. You will be empowered to take action, warrior up, and believe in you. Let's do this. Welcome back, warriors. I'm so excited to have another episode of the Suburban Warrior podcast and to have another amazing warrior sharing her story with us. Today, I have Anita Meeks, who has spent the last 27 years as an expert in the payment processing industry. She continues to work with business owners all over the country, assisting them and tailoring a solution that best suits their needs with the acceptance of payments from their customers. However, 4.5 months ago, she was unexpectedly diagnosed with epilepsy, which has forever changed her life. After having to self-advocate for herself, she was, in addition to her business, had to become an advocate and ambassador for the epilepsy community. What makes Anita unique is that she is open, vulnerable, and speaks her truth. And she is a patient herself. Most who speak of epilepsy are the caretakers and the loved ones versus those who actually live with it. She's passionate about speaking nationally on all that epilepsy is and what it is not, with the hopes of minimizing the negative stigma behind epilepsy. Anita, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, first, I just want to commend you on your bravery and your vulnerability and courage for doing this and for coming out in such an authentic way to share your story.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's get right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your life prior to your diagnosis and what was going on, and then how you were diagnosed?
Sure. Great. So I'm going to start off by saying I'm having a little bit of an off day. So forgive me if I pause a little bit more than normal. I'm not exactly on top of my A game right now, but having said that, I have been in sales my entire life. I've been in the same industry with the payment processing industry. Absolutely love it to this day. I love working with business owners, et cetera, and being the difference that they need in their world. However, I had a little bump in the road about 2.5 years ago. I had a very traumatic experience happen to me. I went through a divorce. I was married for only a very short time, for about 3.5 years. And the divorce ended. There was a separation in September. And this is all going to lead up to where I am today. And that's why I share this, because it'll make more sense. But 2 years ago, Labor Day weekend, I went through a separation. My ex had claimed false allegations against me that landed me in jail. So that was the beginning of the perfect storm that led me to where I am today. And I was in jail for about 8 hours. My son witnessed it, unfortunately. And so from that point on, all within a month, if you can imagine, I lost a lot of money, went to jail for about 8 hours, and was in a hotel with my 11-year-old for about 6 weeks. I chose to live in a hotel with him temporarily. This all happened within a month.
I just want to pause you there because, that is so significant. Just to stop and take that in and, because I can't imagine any of our listeners have ever really thought, imagine themselves in jail, right? Not only getting a divorce, but out of your home, and then to have someone, put false allegations against you, and then you're in jail, whether it's 8 hours, 8 days, I don't think it matters. I think just being in jail at what, when you're sitting in there, what is your thoughts?
Yeah. So it was all planned on his part to gain control of a situation where he knew I was planning on leaving him. He just didn't know when I was going to leave him, exactly what day. And that was driving him a little bit crazy because it was driving him crazy in the sense that he didn't know when I was leaving him. So he had planned this all out, thought it all out, created false allegations. He knew how he was going to be able to gain control of my stuff.
So basically though, while you were in jail, you knew it was going to be short-lived because you knew.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, when you have false allegations pressed against you, he had self-inflicted a wound is what he had done. And he had gone and tried to place blame that self-inflicted wound, which was very minor. It ended up being, I think, 2 to 3 stitches for himself that he had self-inflicted. And that was the only way he could get me out of the house to start beginning to control what he felt he had lost control of.
Right.
And then while I was in jail, but again, you have to go through the process, right? And so it was the most horrific, horrifying, and humiliating moment of probably my entire life.
Yeah.
And the jail is no joke. I was, it was a steel bench, a steel bed, no mattress, no blanket, no nothing, steel toilet and a camera. Yeah. And it was disgusting. It was dirty. And I had to walk in front of all of these criminals making comments as I, in my opinion, walk the shame, right? Or however you want to define it. And it was horrible. And so I was there for about 8 hours. And that was where the journey of where I'm at today really truly began. And so what happened was the stress. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so basically you had a horrific, stressful, really unbelievable month of your life. And that was 2 years ago. And so then what?
Yeah,
did you know at that time?
Yeah. So you go through the process, right? So here I am going from, having a successful business, financially stable, life, what you think is good, but that things are on the edge, right? So you don't just, the divorce was inevitable. And what's that word? See, I'm having an off day.
That's okay. Inevitable.
Yes,
you got it.
So it was just a matter of time. So you go through the process, everything got expunged. It was very clear they were false allegations. And so you go through the process, but it created a lot of stress. I owned a business as in my payment industry. I was an independent contractor, consultant in my world for about 8 years. Had to this situation forced me to go back to corporate. I knew it would be temporarily, but I went back to corporate America in the same industry and then, you're plugging along, you're moving forward. It becomes a mindset, right? So you go from rock bottom to survival to, okay, I'm not going to allow this situation to define who I am. So as this time goes on, the stress increases. I meet somebody, and that ended up becoming a stressful relationship based on some things that were happening in the relationship. And so that was creating additional stress. The leadership role that I had taken in my world was creating, and then COVID hit. Mm-hmm. COVID sent me way over mentally, being incredibly stressed out, being a people person. So not only was I trying to finalize a divorce, I was in a stressful relationship. I was in a leadership role, and then COVID hits.
Yeah, so it was like a perfect storm. Yeah, exactly.
Brewing and brewing and brewing. Why is that significant and why is that important? Because during this entire time, I was feeling completely off in the last year. So what happened was I could feel what I thought was anxiety and panic attacks, and I couldn't really explain it into a way that anybody wouldn't think I was crazy or that I was like something was really wrong with me mentally. But the bottom line was it ended up being seizures where I was self-diagnosing myself as having anxiety and panic attacks, which I kind of was at times, which can trigger up to having seizures. So I had no clue until this past Labor Day, exactly 2 years to the date that I went to jail, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. Now, I share this because I share the history because some of the triggers, and three of the biggest triggers, is stress, insomnia, and binge drinking. So I had the stress. The stress then created insomnia in me. And then to kill what I thought was panic attacks and anxiety and to eliminate the stress, on the weekends, I began binge drinking to hopefully suppress everything I was feeling deep down. So the divorce became final. I ended the relationship. And then the perfect storm just exploded. In September, I had my very first grand mal seizure. Now, I didn't even know, and I don't know if you have questions that you want to ask me, but I didn't even know that I had epilepsy until Labor Day weekend when I had my very first grand mal seizure. And I wasn't even sure that I had what I had the night that it had happened. Right. I was so confused.
Right. So once you had the grand mal seizure, then, then that I'm assuming prompted the actual diagnosis of epilepsy. So then here you are, 2 years to the day, like you said, but in that story, you've also recognized, sort of some of the elements and some of the trigger things that were triggering you. The divorce was final. So a little bit of stress. You got out of a stressful relationship. So you're making changes, but yet, your body is actually, your body is adapting to the trauma. So you have the seizure, you're diagnosed with epilepsy. And how do you get from the diagnosis of epilepsy to where you are now with your mindset, where you're not a victim? You grab the diagnosis, by its horns, and you are just advocating for yourself and for others. How do you get there in just 4.5 months?
Right. So that's a great question. I decided that I was not going to allow this diagnosis to define who I am. It was a very, very scary moment when I had that grand mal seizure because I wasn't sure what was happening to my body. I felt it. I felt the physical pain of it. I felt the convulsions. And then I remember passing out until the next morning. And that was a very scary thought for me. So when I spoke with a friend had called me because she needed something, and I told her that I thought I had a seizure, but I wasn't really sure because I really didn't know what a seizure was, but something in my mind, I was very confused and very out of it. And so she told me, obviously, to call my doctor right away. My doctor told me to get to the emergency room as quickly as possible. If somebody couldn't drive me, to call an ambulance, because they thought possibly, by the way I was describing it, that I could have also possibly had a stroke. So the reason why and where I'm at today, because it was a very scary moment to live through. And I never want anyone to feel alone in the pain and even though I have an amazing tribe and we have a great friends and we have amazing support systems, sometimes you just feel very alone. Yeah. Because it's hard for people to truly understand sometimes things that you're facing internally, especially if you can't explain it in a way where people can understand how you're feeling. And so this whole self-diagnosis of that, which was the wrong thing to do, because I was treating what I thought was panic attacks and anxiety, the way I was treating it, I was actually heightening my epilepsy. which was just a matter of when I was going to have a seizure. So the reason I share that is because that's what's led me to where I am today. I'm incredibly passionate about not only sharing my story, and there's so many details that I can bring out, humiliating moments that happened to me over the last year because I had seizures, unrecognizable seizures, and I had epileptic moments, which created out of character behavior that I couldn't explain. And I was confused myself because I'm like, oh, what just happened? Or what? That's weird. Why did that happen? Right. So when I was diagnosed, first of all, I didn't believe the doctor, the first neurologist, because I'm like, how at 50 years old, can you tell me that I had epilepsy, let alone tell me that I've had it my entire life? At 50 years old, how do I go my entire life without being diagnosed with epilepsy? So I put everything in my world aside and decided that I was going to eat, drink, and sleep epilepsy because I needed to know what I was facing. I mean, to this day, it's a scary moment.
Yes,
right?
of course. I mean, and I think what you said earlier about, feeling alone, and no matter how many people are in your, like you said, tribe, it is, especially with COVID and the quarantine, there is absolutely disconnection happening. And, I think now more than ever, it is so important for us to feel connected to people that are similar to us or have similar stories, and connected to people that are willing to be vulnerable and come forward. And I think, what you're doing is, there is wisdom in the wound. And you obviously were wounded very much over the course of, those 2 years. And I think what you're doing is by finding the wisdom in it and what you can do and what you have to offer, you are taking a diagnosis that most people would, feels detrimental to their life. You're taking that and you're spinning it and putting a whole new perspective on it. So let's talk about all of the actions that you're doing to, really advocate for yourself and for those who have epilepsy and to try to educate them.
So that's a work in progress. I'm only 4.5 months in, almost 5 months in, come the beginning of February. I've become an advocate. I've become an ambassador. And at the end of the day, my biggest goal is, and it doesn't even have to be about epilepsy, it's just life in general. We put so much pressure on ourselves sometimes to feel like we have to present and live this perfect life. And it's just impossible. And
it is impossible. And
it is.
It's impossible. And no one's perfect. No one has the perfect life.
Exactly. And listen, I'm okay with who I am. And I apologize because I'm totally having an off moment.
No. Take your time.
I'm hoping I'm able to deliver this message today with clarity. But it is so incredibly important for us to be real, authentic, and vulnerable. And God gave me a voice. This is not easy to talk about. I'm very uncertain about my future. It's a scary feeling to be, a single parent, have epilepsy, rebuilding a business and trying to help others. More importantly, I'm so passionate. I don't want people to feel the pain that I felt. I don't want people to feel alone like I felt alone. And I certainly don't want others. I was so judged, not only by an individual that I was dating, I was being judged by his friend and his friend's wife. And I was called names and talked about in a negative light when I was having seizures. Now, in everyone's defense, in their defense, they didn't know I had epilepsy. I'm sure if they knew I had epilepsy, maybe things would have been a little bit different. But that's not the point. The point is we're so quick to judge others without compassion. We've lost empathy. People I was humiliated because there was a time period when I was unconscious and unaware of my behavior for a good 15 hours. And to this day, I don't have the details of what my behavior was, but I do know very clearly when I came to the next day that a doctor of all people called me batshit crazy from the night before that I have absolutely no recollection of. And that was the end of discussion. There was no explanation. I wanted to be respectful that I was in his home. So I didn't push the limit of saying, oh my God, what did I possibly do? And the gentleman that I was dating wasn't in a place that he was capable of telling me what had happened, right? He was, these are his friends. So, so my point being is I don't want people to go through and feel alone because none of us have the perfect life. And
there's no such thing.
No, and
it doesn't exist,
hurtful, right? And it's hurtful. Like to this day, it's humiliating to know I've never been called batshit crazy in my entire life, right? To me, I don't know even what that means, but it sounds horrific.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, what does that even mean? But I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a medical doctor that I have had seizures in front of that he didn't even recognize. So if medical teams or not teams, but if
maybe he's the one that's batshit crazy.
Maybe, right? But because you have a title. No, but that's a good point, right? So that brings me back to the neurologist. My first neurologist, I fired because he just wanted to drug me up. Right. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. And so that's part of where my self-advocacy comes in. People are so quick and their egos are so big that sometimes they just can't put themselves in somebody else's shoes and say, gosh, I wonder how they feel.
Right. And that's why going back to your point about being your own advocate, it is so important for you to take really charge of your life, no matter what your diagnosis is, no matter what illness that you have, or even whatever situation you're in that is one that you find yourself, it's confrontational, or it's making you angry, or you feel sick to your stomach about something that's happening to you or your kid or whatever it may be. The only person that is going to be able to solve that problem is you. And I know that what you're explaining about being called batshit crazy, how much that affected you, which I completely understand, but that's on him. And as soon as you release that energy of feeling humiliated or embarrassed or all of those things, all those emotions that name makes you feel, as soon as you're able to release that energy and give it back to him and say, that's not me. I don't deserve that. I don't accept it. And you put it back on him, then it's no longer part of you. That's just a past experience that you don't have to carry around because, of course, we can't control what other people do. We can't control names that people call us. We can't control other people's actions. We can only control ourselves, our own thoughts, our own emotions, and our actions. And, I think by everything that you're doing, by being an advocate for those with epilepsy and telling your story with honesty, is, and not only telling your story, but when you're showing up. And when you showed up today, before we started recording, the first thing you said to me was, I hope that I can do this because I'm really having an off day. And that's vulnerability. That's speaking your truth. Because guess what? Every single person listening, and including myself and every single human being out there, we have off days, right? Now, your off days might be a little harder because you're dealing with a chronic illness, but we all have off days. And I think the more that we're willing to show up and say to ourselves, I'm having an off day, but it's okay. I'm going to get through. I'm going to do what I can. It's just about shifting your perspective and shifting your mindset on that off day, right? An off day doesn't mean that you have to drink your sorrows away every day or, self-medicate or do all of these things that could be more destructive. It's a mindset shift. It's a perspective that you have to get to. But you have to be willing to be honest with yourself. And that's what you're able to do, which I think a lot of people struggle with. You're honest and able to say, I'm having an off day. Just those simple words help you to recognize it and then shift your perspective and then see what you need to do to move forward.
Yeah. And I agree 100% with everything that you're saying. And I think our world is lacking so much empathy and compassion for other human beings. We're so quick to judge. We're so quick to think we know so much about other people and how they feel and what they're going through without even having the conversation with that individual. And I am so incredibly, so you had asked me, about my future and what am I doing? I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm showing up every day and I know what I'm passionate about. And I'm passionate about trying to help minimize the negative stigma, not only behind epilepsy, but also to give individuals, there are so many individuals with epilepsy that are living in silence because their fear of the judgment. They don't want people to know that they have epilepsy. So many people have reached out to me, and I'm very humbled about it privately about, oh my gosh, I have epilepsy, but I don't want anyone to know. And this is why. And thank you for being the voice. So that's what keeps me motivated. That's why I created the Facebook page that I did, because so many people, I have a voice and God has led me in this direction. I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure it out as I go along, but I do know what I'm passionate about. And I'm so incredibly passionate about just leading with a little bit more of compassion and empathy for other individuals and less judgment, because you really don't know their story. You don't know what's happening within themselves. That's, what they're going through.
Boy, do I love that. I mean, just basically having the courage to find your passion or know your passion, and then just take little steps each day, brick by brick, to follow that passion and dive headfirst into it so that you can make a difference in others' lives is really just, it's so important. And I think people that are really dealing with so much pain, whether it's physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, there's so much going on right now because of this world that we're living in, and these times. It is really important to figure out, okay, what makes me energized? What am I meant to do? And it sounds like you have absolutely through trauma and the hard way, you found what that was. And so you mentioned your Facebook. I'm sorry, you mentioned your Facebook group. Can you tell us what that group is?
So I created, it's only a weekend. It'll be a week tomorrow that I created this page. It's called Fearlessly Alive. And so there's two different Fearlessly Alive Facebook groups that I didn't realize there was another one. So the whole purpose behind that is vulnerability and facing your fears and being honest and real. I don't want it. I want it to be about real stories, real people, real life. Not everybody is capable of speaking their vulnerabilities, their traumas, their humiliations. And it is not an easy task. I struggle with it each and every time I share my story, although it's becoming easier and easier. Internally, it's still like, gosh, that was really embarrassing and really humiliating. I went to jail. I was called batshit crazy by a medical doctor who probably didn't recognize my seizures, right? Like, that's really hard to speak. Because I understand people who are afraid of judgment. But if my humiliation and by me sharing my story saves a life, gives somebody hope, it's all worth me being judged, humiliated, embarrassed, because I've known 4 people who have taken their lives over the last 8 months since COVID because they felt alone. They felt like they didn't have any hope. Nobody could understand where they're coming from. Nobody could understand in their mind, there was no other way out. And that breaks my heart. So this Fearlessly Alive group that I created is a place to where I hope to lead by example, by sharing real stories, by finding those individuals who are able to share their own adversities, how they've overcome them, so that those who are feeling alone and stuck have a little bit of hope and are inspired that, hey, oh my gosh, this individual gets it. This individual has felt my pain. And at the end of the day, if I can accomplish that for one person, I've saved 1 million lives in my life, in my world, right?
Yeah.
So that's really the sole purpose, is to give hope to those who feel alone and to share so many different stories that somebody's going to be able to relate to that story.
Absolutely. And I think, what you're really showing us is that, we can do hard things. You're doing things that you said are really hard for you, but we can do them. We just have to show up, put ourselves out there, and be willing to be vulnerable and share our story and be a leader. And that's exactly what you're doing. So, Anita, I want to thank you so much for sharing your very personal, traumatic story with us today, and then sharing how, you've come out on the side of optimism. You've gone through it, which we all have to do. You have to go through your trauma. There's no way over it, but you're coming out with, such knowledge and wisdom to share with the world. So, everything happens for a reason. I truly believe that. And you're finding your reason with all of this, with your mission and what you're doing to help others. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll have your Facebook page linked in the show notes, but it's Fearlessly Alive. And how about on Instagram? Can they find you on Instagram?
Yes, I'm not real active on Instagram.
Okay.
I'm more active on my Fearlessly Alive. And what makes my page stand out differently than another Fearlessly Alive is that alive is all caps. Okay. We are alive. There's a purpose behind it. We are alive. We are fearless, and we will all be okay if we're just willing to lead with a little bit more compassion and empathy and less judgment. We've got to stop the judgment and hurting people. We just have to.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. This is the time to look in the mirror and figure out what ourselves personally, what we're all about, what fuels us, what energizes us, what's our passions, and not worry about judging other people. That's not our role. That's not what we're here for. So thank you so much, Anita.
Thank you.
I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day. Thanks so much for listening to the Suburban Warrior podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, because we would love to hear from you. Thanks so much, Warriors. Have an awesome day.